Hello, welcome to this lesson on money. Money has three different purposes. It's a medium of exchange, which means you can buy and sell stuff with it. It's a unit of account, which means you can measure the value of things with it. And it's a store of value, which means you can use it at a later date. The more liquid something is, the closer that it can be used as a medium of exchange, and the less risky it's going to be. The less liquid something is, the more risky it's going to be. So here you have some examples. We have money, cash. We have stocks, a lot less liquid. Toys that you collect and sell are even less liquid than that. So we categorize different measures of money based on their liquidity. M1 is the first measure we're going to talk about. That includes cash, which is currencies, demand deposits, like the money you have in your checking account that you use your debit card with, and traveler's checks. M2 is a little bit more expanded view of that. It includes everything in M1 plus savings accounts, certificate of deposit accounts, and money markets accounts, which are what people usually use to save their money. We also have M0, which is the monetary base. This is more about banks, which includes currency and also bank reserves, like cash that banks have in their bank vaults, and also the reserves that they have decided to deposit at the central bank to for safekeeping. The current modern system of banking is called fractional reserve banking. And what happens is when you deposit money at a bank, they keep some of your money at that bank and then loan most of your money out to somebody else and charge that person interest on that loan. So here's an example. I deposit $100 I have into my bank. The bank's gonna hold $10. So the amount they have to hold in the bank vault in the reserves is called the required reserve ratio, which in this case is 10% because they're holding $10 out of my $100 deposit. So that's 10%. Now, the rest, the other $90, they don't have to hold in the vault. So they're going to have the option to lend it out to somebody else and charge them interest. And this is how banks make money. They lend your money out to somebody else and charge them interest. Now, that's not the only thing that's going to happen because I deposit money, my bank loans it to somebody else, but that other person's also going to deposit money in another bank, and that bank is then going to loan that money to somebody else, and so on and so on and so on. So how many times will new loans be made in the economy? We'll use the money multiplier to figure that out. That's 1 over the required reserve ratio. Now, if we go back to this example, if the required reserve ratio is 10% or zero point 0.1, that's 1 over zero point 0.1, which is 10. So the amount of times this is going to happen is 10 times throughout the economy, throughout the money system. Now, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve System, which we're going to call the Fed, sets the required reserve ratio in our country. Here we have a balance sheet, a bank balance sheet. So let's go over some accounting real quick. Assets are things that the bank owns that give them value, and liabilities are what the bank owes to other people. Here, the liabilities are demand deposits of $100 because they owe this to somebody else who deposited the money in there. And their assets are the required reserves, which is $10, and excess reserves, which are $90. Now, let's calculate the required reserve ratio. That's going to be the amount they have in required reserves, which is $10, divided by how much people have deposited in that bank, which is $100 times 100 gives us 10% or a ratio of 0.1. Remember, required reserves, the bank must hold that. They cannot lend it out. But excess reserves, the bank can do whatever they want with that, including loaning it out. Even they could loan out all of the excess reserves. They could just not touch the required reserves. So if I deposit $200 in a bank, the bank must hold 10% because that's the required reserve ratio, which is 10% of 200 is $20. The rest is going to go into excess reserves, which is 200 minus 20, that's $180. Now, if the bank lends out all of the excess reserves, we can see how much that's going to change the money supply. The change in the money supply is going to equal the money multiplier times the initial loan the bank makes. And remember, the loan can only be made with the money from excess reserves. So here we're assuming they lend out all of the excess reserves, which is $180 from my deposit. So that's going to be right here, $180. The money multiplier is 1 over the required reserve ratio, which is 1 over zero point 0.1, which is 10. So they made an initial loan of 180 times 10, that's the money multiplier. So the total change in the money supply is going to be an increase of $1,800. This is assuming the bank lends out all of the excess reserves, like we stated here, from my deposit. They might not loan out all of the excess reserves they get from my deposit. They might decide to keep some more, but that's what we're assuming for this example. Now, what if the Fed gives a bank $500? When they buy and sell stuff to banks, that's called open market operations. So they're giving the bank $500 for whatever they want to buy. Um, since this is not a person depositing money, then the same rules don't apply. There is no requirement to hold this in required reserves. So since there's no requirement to hold it in required reserves, this will all go to the excess reserves. Now we're going to assume again a bank is going to lend out all of the excess reserves, and we're looking at the reserve requirement ratio is 20% or zero point 0.2. So the total change in the money supply is the initial loan they're going to make, and we're going to assume they lend out all of the excess reserves from this transaction, which is going to be 500, because the bank didn't have to keep any in their required reserves. They're all in the excess reserves. They're going to loan out all of it. The money multiplier is 1 over the reserve requirement ratio, which is 1 over zero point 0.2, which is 5. So it's going to be 500 times 5. That means a total increase in the money supply of $2,500. Now, remember, the Fed giving the bank money is different than somebody depositing money. If somebody deposits money, some of it goes into required reserves. When the Fed gives money to a bank, it's not a deposit, so they don't have to keep any in required reserves. It all goes towards the excess reserves. All right, the Fed controls the US money supply. Let's see how their actions impact the economy. Here we're going to look at the equation of exchange, where the money supply times the velocity of money, which is the amount of times that money is reused, is going to equal the price level times real GDP. And if you put the price level and real GDP back together, you get nominal GDP. Now, if the money supply is 500, price is 10, and real GDP is 100, then we can solve for the velocity of money right here. Would do 10 times 100, which gives us 1,000 divided by 500. That means the velocity is going to be 2. So money is reused twice. Here we can see that if the money supply increases, velocity stays the same, and real GDP stays the same, then by increasing the money supply, the price level is going to end up going up, leading to inflation. So the Fed should be very careful when changing the money supply. If the Fed increases the money supply but GDP stays the same, the price level would also increase. So the Fed, to prevent inflation, should really only be increasing the money supply to stimulate the economy if GDP is also decreasing, assuming the velocity stays the same. They don't want to be increasing the money supply if the economy is already beyond its full capacity, its sustainable level. That's all for this video. See you next time.